Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony.
In a political climate where chaos often drowns out clarity, moments of true accountability are rare. But what unfolded in Congress wasn't just another headline, it was a seismic jolt. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse didn't walk into that room looking for drama. He walked in with facts, patience, and something Washington fears more than anything: receipts. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's get into what actually happened. Something extraordinary took place on Capitol Hill. Senator Whitehouse directly confronted both the Attorney General of the United States and the sitting FBI director, and what he revealed wasn't speculation, wasn't spin, and wasn't political theater. It was documented, checkable, verifiable contradiction. According to him, these were not minor misstatements. These were not slips of the tongue buried in legal nuance. These were flat-out false claims presented to Congress, on the record. Think about that for a moment. The top law enforcement officials in the country, the people entrusted with upholding the law, speaking under oath, and acting as the final guardians of justice, now being accused of saying things that simply do not align with the evidence. And Whitehouse didn't just hint at it, he exposed it with specificity, showing exactly where words, facts, and public records diverged. If you believe that accountability still has a place in this democracy, and if you still believe truth matters even when it's inconvenient, then what happened next is something you truly need to hear. Because this wasn't just a senator calling out two powerful officials. This was a direct test of whether the rules that govern a republic still apply to everyone, including those at the very top.
Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee. The Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer, it's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the Fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the federal district court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony that there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast. I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark.
What happened in that hearing wasn't theater. It was a stress test for the very idea of a functioning republic. Senator Whitehouse didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand, and he didn't need to. Instead, he walked the committee step by step through verifiable facts that all pointed to one uncomfortable conclusion. When the most powerful people in the justice system make statements that don't match the public record, and nothing happens, accountability stops being a principle and starts becoming a slogan. He began with something simple. The kind of thing anyone can check. The Attorney General, someone sworn to uphold the law, made claims about campaign contributions that were directly contradicted by Federal Election Commission records. According to Whitehouse, even an intern could have pulled up those filings and seen the truth. That matters, because some statements aren't subjective or nuanced, they're documentary. And when a top official gets a documentary fact wrong under oath, it chips away at trust in the system. Then came the second, even more troubling piece. The FBI director told the committee he couldn't discuss his own grand jury testimony because he said a court order prevented it. But the chief judge later publicly clarified that wasn't true. Witnesses are generally free to speak about what they personally said. That raises a serious question. Was a claim of being legally restrained used as a shield to avoid answering tough questions? This isn't about partisanship. It's about whether the rules still apply evenly. Because the moment the standard for truth becomes conditional, depending on who's speaking, accountability becomes optional. And when accountability becomes optional, institutions weaken. Oversight exists to stop that from happening. Committees can demand documents, call witnesses back, push for independent reviews, and if necessary, refer matters for legal inquiry. These processes are slow, and they're supposed to be, but they're also the backbone of democratic self-correction. So what can the public do? Start by treating this moment as more than a viral clip. Look at the actual records, the FEC filings, the judge's statements, the documents Whitehouse referenced. Hold your elected officials to those facts. Support journalism that digs, not just reacts. And don't accept evasions as normal. Truth isn't a luxury for one side. It's the minimum requirement for shared governance. If you believe institutions should answer to the law rather than to loyalty, keep paying attention and keep pushing. Oversight only works when the public insists that honesty before Congress is non-negotiable. This is the Westminster.